The date was November 13th, 1942. The time, just after 1 in the morning. On the bridge of the destroyer Amatsukaze, threading through Iron Bottom Sound, Commander Tamichi Hara felt his hands grip the railing as star shells burst overhead. The white light crashed down like a hammer, exposing his ship in brutal detail to every enemy gun within range. For 20 years, the Imperial Japanese Navy had transformed night combat into something approaching perfection. Their sailors trained relentlessly in darkness. Their lookouts could spot ship silhouettes at distances that astounded foreign observers. But now, in this terrible moment, American shells were finding their mark before his own men could even identify where the fire originated. The mathematics of naval warfare were changing in real time, and Hara was witnessing it firsthand. Through the bridge windows, he saw something that violated everything 2 decades of Japanese naval doctrine had taught him. American ships were striking accurately at ranges exceeding 10,000 yards in complete darkness. Their shells arrived with mechanical regularity. No searchlights swept the sky, revealing their positions. No illumination shells preceded their salvos. It was as if they possessed sight beyond human capability. The USS Helena's radar-guided guns had locked onto the Amatsukaze. When Hara kept his searchlights active too long, desperately trying to locate his attackers, the American cruiser's 6-inch shells tore through his destroyer. 43 men died in those seconds. 3 kilometers distant, the battleship Hiei shuddered beneath concentrated fire from ships her crews couldn't see. Here was the pride of Japan's fleet, a veteran of Pearl Harbor, being systematically dismantled by enemies fighting from ranges far beyond the reach of human vision. What no Japanese officer comprehended in that terrifying moment was that they were witnessing the arrival of something that would reshape naval warfare entirely. The SG surface search radar represented technology that would obliterate Japan's most decisive tactical advantage within 18 months. The mathematics of coming defeat were not being written in ships lost or territories abandoned, but in the sudden collapse of 2 decades' worth of training, doctrine, and national strategy. Everything had rested on one assumption, that the Imperial Japanese Navy owned the darkness. That assumption had roots stretching back to 1904. At the Battle of Tsushima, during the Russo-Japanese War, Admiral Togo's torpedo boats had devastated the Russian fleet under the cover of night. That victory became foundational doctrine. Everything flowed from it. Night combat became the cornerstone of how Japan would defeat numerically superior enemies. By 1942, this doctrine had evolved into the most sophisticated system for fighting in darkness the world had ever seen. Japanese sailors trained their entire careers to master the night. Lookouts underwent specialized programs to enhance their ability to see in low light. They spent hours in darkened chambers. They avoided foods that depleted vitamin A. They practiced constantly at estimating distance when visibility was poor. The result was remarkable. The average Japanese lookout could identify ship silhouettes at 7,000 meters on a moonless night, easily twice the distance their American counterparts could manage. The technological gap seemed to prove Japanese superiority. While America fumbled with primitive radar sets that most captains didn't trust, Japan possessed the finest optical equipment on Earth. Binoculars manufactured by Nippon Kogaku, known today as Nikon, provided magnification that gathered light with exceptional clarity. The Type 93 long-lance torpedoes could strike targets at 24,000 yards, a range so vast that American ships had no hope of detecting them in darkness. Early battles in the Pacific validated every assumption. At Savo Island on August 9, 1942, Japanese cruisers had annihilated an Allied force in just 33 minutes of night fighting, sinking 4 heavy cruisers without losing a single ship of their own. But unknown to the Imperial Navy, a revolution in radar technology was unfolding inside American shipyards and laboratories. The SG Surface Search Radar, developed under guidance from the MIT Radiation Laboratory and the Naval Research Laboratory, represented a quantum leap beyond the crude sets that had failed so spectacularly at Savo Island. Operating on a 10-centimeter wavelength with 50 kilowatts of power output, the SG radar could detect a destroyer at 15 nautical miles and track it accurately enough for blind firing at 10 miles. The MIT Radiation Laboratory, established in November 1940, had grown into a sprawling enterprise, employing nearly 4,000 people by 1943. The foundation of everything they accomplished rested on a single piece of technology. In September 1940, the British Tizard mission had delivered the cavity magnetron to American shores. Historians would later call it the most valuable cargo ever brought to the country. This device enabled the production of approximately 1,000 SG radar sets during the war. The first Fletcher-class destroyer, USS Fletcher DD-445, commissioned on June 30, 1942, carried this revolutionary system as standard equipment. By November 1942, Fletcher herself operated in the Solomon Islands, though she would be the sole Fletcher-class destroyer present at the naval battle of Guadalcanal. The planned position indicator scope provided what amounted to a god's-eye view of the battle. All contacts appeared on a circular screen that refreshed every 2 seconds. Operators could distinguish between different ship types by analyzing their radar signatures. They could track the wakes of torpedoes. They could even spot submarines running on the surface. The system worked equally well whether fighting occurred in daylight or darkness, in clear weather or storms, through smoke or fog. The SG radar was integrated with the Mark 37 gun director, which contained an analog computer that calculated firing solutions in seconds. This system automatically adjusted for target speed, course, wind effects, and the motion of the firing ship itself. The 5-inch 38 caliber guns mounted on Fletcher-class destroyers could fire 15 to 20 rounds per minute with radar-directed accuracy that seemed almost supernatural. The night of November 12 to 13, 1942, began the destruction of Japanese assumptions about the nature of warfare at sea. Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan's task force intercepted Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe's bombardment group approaching Henderson Field. Though only USS Fletcher represented the new destroyer class, several American ships carried SG radar, including USS Helena. At 124 hours, Helena's SG radar detected Japanese ships at 27,000 yards, a distance far beyond what any lookout could see. For the next 20 minutes, American radar operators tracked the approaching Japanese force with perfect clarity, while Japanese lookouts strained uselessly into the darkness. The battle descended into chaos. American radar-directed fire disrupted Japanese formations before they could employ their superior night-fighting tactics. The destroyer Akatsuki, attempting her specialized night torpedo attack, was caught in radar-directed crossfire from multiple American ships. She exploded and sank within minutes. Commander Hara on the Amatsukaze experienced this new reality directly. His ships successfully torpedoed USS Barton, snapping her in half, and USS Juneau, leaving her crippled. But when he illuminated USS San Francisco with searchlights to improve his gunnery, USS Helena's radar-directed guns immediately found the Amatsukaze in the darkness, inflicting severe damage and heavy casualties. The battleship Hiei, flagship of Admiral Abe, became the focus of American radar-directed fire. In darkness and rain squalls that should have provided concealment, she absorbed 85 shell hits from enemies firing at ranges beyond Japanese visual capability. Her bridge was wrecked, her steering was destroyed, her superstructure was ablaze. She would be scuttled the following day. The first Japanese battleship lost in the war. The disparity between Japanese and American night-fighting capabilities became increasingly apparent through late 1942 and into 1943. The American SG radar operated at 3 GHz, with 50 kilowatts of peak power, detecting destroyers at 15+ nautical miles with accuracy of plus or minus 40 yards in range and plus or minus half a degree in bearing. Weighing 1,000 pounds with 95% operational availability, it could be deployed widely throughout the fleet. The Japanese Type 22 radar, by contrast, operated at only 150 MHz with just 2 kilowatts of peak power, detecting destroyers at 10 nautical miles under optimal conditions, with accuracy of plus or minus 300 yards in range and plus or minus 5 degrees in bearing. Weighing 2,200 pounds with only 40% operational availability, it was both cumbersome and unreliable. Of the first 60 Type 22 sets built, only about 6 actually functioned properly. Total Japanese radar production during the entire war reached only about 300 units, less than one-third of American SG production alone. The technological gap reflected deeper organizational failures. Japan had actually developed cavity magnetrons by 1937, and Dr. Hidetsugu Yagi had invented the directional antenna bearing his name back in 1926. Yet military leadership excluded Yagi from radar work. When Japanese forces captured British radar equipment featuring Yagi antennas, they didn't recognize the design as a Japanese invention. Army-Navy rivalry prevented coordination, with both services developing separate incompatible systems. During the Battle of Vella La Vella on October 6–7, 1943, USS Selfridge detected and tracked Long-Lance torpedoes using radar, allowing evasion of weapons that had previously been invariably lethal. The Fletcher-class destroyer's radar advantage extended far beyond simple detection into complete tactical superiority. The Tokyo Express, those high-speed destroyer runs resupplying Guadalcanal, had depended entirely on Japanese night-fighting superiority. These missions, commanded by the finest destroyer captains in the Imperial Navy, began suffering increasing losses to radar-equipped American ships. Captain Ryuzo Tanaka, who commanded the 2nd Destroyer Squadron and led many Tokyo Express runs, would later write about the growing American radar advantage in his 1956 article for the U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings. Though Tanaka's own tactical brilliance had achieved success at Tassafaronga, he recognized that darkness no longer provided protection against American technology. By early 1943, American destroyers were intercepting Tokyo Express runs in complete darkness, in rain, in conditions of near-zero visibility. They fired first, fired accurately, and pursued Japanese forces even when they fled at full speed into the night. The night of November 25, 1943, demonstrated the complete reversal of tactical advantage. 5 destroyers under Captain Arleigh Burke intercepted 5 Japanese destroyers off Cape George. In a running battle fought entirely by radar, Burke's squadron sank 3 Japanese destroyers, Onami, Makinami, and Yugiri, without taking significant damage. The Japanese never achieved visual contact with their attackers. This would be the last major surface engagement in the Solomon Islands and marked the end of significant surface combat in the area. By mid-1943, Japanese naval commanders were desperately trying to adapt to the new reality. The death of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto in April 1943 removed the leader who might have best understood the implications of American technological superiority. Japanese attempts to counter American radar proved futile. They deployed rudimentary radar countermeasures, aluminum strips called Gimmon-Shui, deception paper. But these were ineffective against sophisticated SG radar. Japanese radar development, hampered by inter-service rivalry and resource constraints, remained years behind American technology. Commander Tamichi Hara, who survived the war as the only IJN destroyer captain from Pearl Harbor to do so, would later write in his memoir about the growing realization among Japanese officers that their night-fighting expertise had become obsolete. Though his memoir contains some factual errors, his assessment of American technological superiority was accurate. The Battle of Empress Augusta Bay on November 2, 1943, provided the clearest demonstration of radar's transformation of naval combat. Rear Admiral Aaron Merrill's Task Force 39, including several Fletcher-class destroyers with the latest SG radar modifications, intercepted a superior Japanese force under Rear Admiral Sentaro Omori. At 0227 hours, radar contact at 35,900 yards gave the Americans complete tactical advantage. For the next hours, American ships tracked the approaching enemy with perfect clarity, maneuvering for optimal firing positions while remaining invisible to Japanese lookouts. The American destroyers demonstrated capabilities that seemed supernatural to Japanese observers. Ships engaged at ranges exceeding 14,000 yards in total darkness, scoring hits with their first salvos. They detected and evaded Long-Lance torpedoes using radar tracking of their wakes, then counterattacked the launching destroyers without ever making visual contact. The battle's outcome shocked the Japanese high command. Despite superior numbers and firepower, Omori's force was routed, losing the light cruiser Sendai and destroyer Hatsukaze while inflicting minimal damage. Samuel Eliot Morison noted this battle marked the end of Japan's previous advantage in night engagement. The psychological impact on Japanese naval personnel transcended mere tactical defeat. Men who had spent years perfecting their night fighting skills watched helplessly as technology rendered their expertise worthless. The erosion of morale was documented in Japanese operational reports. The vaunted Long-Lance torpedoes, launched at radar-guided estimates, increasingly found only empty water. Elite destroyer crews that had considered themselves masters of night combat found themselves helpless against an enemy they couldn't see. The Fletcher-class production program represented American industrial might at its zenith. Between 1942 and 1944, American shipyards produced exactly 175 Fletcher-class destroyers, more destroyers than Japan built of all types during the entire war. Each ship carried radar systems more sophisticated than anything in the Japanese fleet. The SG radar sets were manufactured by Western Electric, Westinghouse, and General Electric at a rate that defied Japanese comprehension. The magnetron tubes at the radar's heart, impossible for Japan to manufacture reliably, were mass-produced in American factories. By war's end, the United States had produced over 100,000 radar sets of all types. The disparity extended beyond mere production numbers. American radar improved continuously throughout the war. The SG radar evolved through multiple versions, each iteration increasing range, accuracy, and discrimination capability. By 1944, American destroyers carried radar systems that could detect a surface submarine at 18 miles and track a periscope at 3 miles. Meanwhile, Japanese radar development stagnated. The Naval Electrical Research Department had only 300 staff by August 1943, compared to MIT Radiation Laboratory's 4,000 employees. Critical components required materials Japan couldn't obtain. Most crucially, Japan lacked the vast electronics industry that supported American radar development. As radar negated traditional night-fighting tactics, the Imperial Navy desperately sought new doctrines. Orders from Combined Fleet Headquarters began acknowledging American radar superiority and emphasizing radical maneuvering and acceptance of higher casualties. These orders represented complete capitulation to American technological superiority. The Imperial Navy, that had once sought night battles, now actively avoided them. When forced to fight, they employed tactics that accepted severe losses for the possibility of achieving torpedo launch positions. Training programs struggled to adapt. The torpedo school at Yokosuka attempted to develop blind launch techniques, firing spreads of torpedoes at calculated positions without visual contact. Success rates were minimal. The Naval War College developed new night-fighting doctrines based on accepting catastrophic casualties. Even Japan's submarine force, initially less affected by American radar superiority, soon encountered the technology's reach. Fleet submarines attempting to recharge batteries on the surface at night discovered that darkness no longer provided safety. The SG radar could detect a surface submarine at ranges exceeding 15 miles, far beyond visual range even in daylight. Japanese submarines dependent on surface running for speed and battery charging found their operational effectiveness crippled. Transit speeds dropped from 15 knots on the surface to 3 knots submerged. Battery life limited underwater endurance to hours rather than days. American destroyer escorts equipped with radar hunted Japanese submarines with deadly efficiency. USS England sank 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days during May 1944, all detected initially by radar. Japanese submarine losses reached catastrophic levels by late 1944. Japanese naval officers drew parallels between their radar disadvantage and the B-29 bombing campaign. Just as American bombers struck from altitudes beyond Japanese interceptor reach, American destroyers struck from beyond visual range. Technology had created sanctuary from which Americans could attack without risk. The psychological parallel was exact. Fighter pilots watching B-29s overhead beyond their ceiling experienced the same helplessness as destroyer crews being shelled by invisible enemies. Traditional warrior skills, courage, training, and spirit meant nothing against technological superiority that prevented engagement entirely. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 provided the final devastating confirmation of radar's transformation of naval warfare. The largest naval battle in history became a technological mismatch that demonstrated American superiority. During the Battle of Samar on October 25, 1944, the destroyer USS Johnston, under Commander Ernest Evans, engaged Japanese battleships using radar-directed fire in rain squalls and smoke. Despite being vastly outgunned, the American destroyer escorts and destroyers used radar to coordinate attacks through smokescreens that blinded Japanese optical rangefinders. The Japanese ships used color-coded dyes in their shells. Yamato used white, Nagato brilliant pink, Haruna greenish yellow, Kongo blood red, so optical spotters could identify shellfall. This practice, necessitated by the lack of fire control radar, contrasted starkly with American radar-controlled automatic firing systems. In Surigao Strait, American destroyers launched coordinated torpedo attacks from beyond visual range, guided entirely by radar. The battleship Fuso was torpedoed and sunk by destroyers her crew never saw. Japanese forces entered the strait piecemeal and were destroyed by radar-directed fire from ships they couldn't locate. The Battle of Vella Gulf unfolded across the nights of August 6th and 7th, 1943, presenting a stark demonstration of American radar superiority in combat. Commander Frederick Musburgers commanded 6 destroyers that picked up 4 Japanese destroyers on their radar screens at 11:33 in the evening. Those Japanese vessels were transporting 950 troops. Using their radar advantage, the American forces maneuvered into the perfect position to launch torpedoes while remaining completely undetected in the darkness. What happened next was absolutely devastating for the Japanese. 3 Japanese destroyers, Hagikaze, Arashi, and Kawakaze, went down in the darkness. Over 1,200 Japanese sailors and soldiers perished in those waters. The Americans? They suffered not a single casualty. Not one ship took a hit. Captain Tamachi Hara commanded the sole surviving Japanese destroyer, the Shigura. Looking back on that terrible night, he would describe it as a perfect American victory. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz himself called it a little classic of naval warfare, recognizing it for what it truly was. Proof positive that radar had completely reversed the advantage in nighttime naval combat. Just 3 months later, on November 25, 1943, Captain Arleigh Burke's destroyer Squadron 23 delivered another flawless radar victory at Capes George. Burke's force detected 5 Japanese destroyers at 1:41 in the morning. They tracked every move those Japanese ships made, all while remaining invisible themselves. When the moment came to strike, the Americans unleashed devastation. 3 more Japanese destroyers, Onaomi, Makanami, and Yugiri, were destroyed. The Japanese lost 647 men. The Americans lost nothing, no casualties, no damage, nothing. Burke's report on the engagement was straightforward and clinical. Everything had unfolded through radar plotting. The American crews never even laid eyes on their enemy. Visual contact proved unnecessary. The radar told them everything they needed to know. These 2 battles convinced the Japanese naval leadership of an uncomfortable truth. Night surface combat was finished. Engaging American destroyers equipped with radar meant certain destruction. Orders came down from Combined Fleet, essentially ending Japanese destroyer operations under cover of darkness. The Navy acknowledged what its officers could see clearly. The advantage belonged entirely to the Americans now. The statistics on American production starkly revealed the technological gulf separating the 2 nations. Between 1942 and 1944, American shipyards produced 175 Fletcher-class destroyers. The Americans manufactured roughly 1,000 SG radar sets during those same years. Across all radar types, American production exceeded 100,000 units. Cavity magnetrons, the critical component making advanced radar possible, came off production lines at a rate of 250,000 units monthly by 1944. The Americans trained more than 50,000 radar technicians. They poured $1.5 billion into radar development. Japan's situation painted a completely different picture. Between 1942 and 1944, Japanese yards managed to produce just 32 destroyers of all types. For radar sets, all varieties combined, Japan produced approximately 300 units. Radio tube production peaked at around 50,000 tubes monthly. Japan trained roughly 500 radar technicians, and many of those technicians lacked proper training. Investment in radar development remained minimal. The disparity in crucial areas exceeded a 50-to-1 ratio. America possessed more radar sets on destroyers alone than Japan produced for every conceivable purpose. Each Fletcher-class destroyer represented industrial capacity that Japan would not match for decades. Every American radar technician represented knowledge that Japanese forces struggled desperately to match. Japanese naval training had developed over 20 years around one fundamental principle: mastery of night combat through visual observation and training. Night vision training schools developed generations of lookouts. Optical ranging systems became refined to remarkable precision. Yet overnight, all of it became obsolete, and the Japanese Navy had no way to replace what had suddenly become useless. The few radar sets Japan managed to acquire were crude and unreliable. The Type 22 surface search radar, when it functioned at all, possessed less than half the capability of the American SG radar. More troubling still, it lacked the discrimination needed to separate individual targets or direct gunfire accurately. The display showed only a simple line with range as a spike. Nothing like the revolutionary PPI display on American sets that showed all contacts laid out like a map. Training on these inferior sets backfired. Japanese officers learned to distrust radar after equipment failures. They reverted to visual methods, despite knowing those methods were inadequate against American radar-guided weapons. The waters surrounding Guadalcanal, waters the sailors had named Iron Bottom Sound because so many ships rested on the sea floor, became the proving ground where radar warfare reached maturity. The transformation appeared starkly in the statistical record. During August and September of 1942, Japanese destroyer losses in night engagements nearly matched American losses. Come October and November 1942, Japanese losses doubled American losses. By December 1942 through January 1943, Japanese losses tripled. February 1943 onward, the figures became catastrophic for Japan, while Americans suffered minimally. When Guadalcanal finally ended, Japan had lost 40 destroyers in just 16 months, according to United States Naval Institute sources. The night fighting advantage that formed the cornerstone of Japanese naval strategy had flipped completely in the American favor. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, steeped in samurai tradition and belief in personal combat excellence, the radar revolution represented a cultural catastrophe. The very idea that technology could replace warrior skill struck at the fundamental beliefs of Japanese military philosophy. Young officers raised on stories of samurai valor and personal courage struggled to comprehend war where the enemy remained invisible and unreachable, where battle occurred at ranges the human eye could never perceive. The radar gap also challenged Japanese racial ideology that portrayed Americans as spiritually weak, dependent on machines precisely because they lacked true warrior courage. Japanese attempts to counter American radar demonstrated both ingenuity and desperation. Chaff and window, the same electronic countermeasures used elsewhere, proved ineffective against sophisticated American radar systems. Electronic warfare attempts achieved nothing. Japan lacked the industrial base to produce jamming equipment in significant quantities. The Japanese explored tactical solutions, including special paints supposedly capable of reducing radar reflection, but testing showed these provided marginal improvement at best. By mid-1944, the Naval Technical Department had essentially abandoned attempts to match American radar capability. Japan turned to a different path. In October 1944, the Navy adopted kamikaze tactics. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi organized the first official kamikaze unit on October 19, 1944, at Mabalakat Airfield. He explained that with only 40 aircraft operational and pilots lacking proper training, conventional attacks had become futile. The documented reasons behind kamikaze adoption included catastrophic pilot losses, inadequate training, loss of air superiority, and critical resource shortages. Contemporary documents never cited radar disadvantage as a factor in embracing suicide tactics. The first coordinated kamikaze attacks occurred on October 25, 1944, coincidentally the same day as the Battle of Samar. These attacks, however, stemmed from desperation about pilot quality and aircraft availability rather than radar concerns. Statistical evidence from Pacific destroyer engagements powerfully illustrated radar's impact across distinct periods. In the pre-radar era, from December 1941 through October 1942, Japanese destroyers lost 8 ships in night combat. Americans lost 11. The exchange ratio favored Japan at 1.4 to 1. During the early radar era from November 1942 through June 1943, Japanese losses in night combat reached 19, while American losses stood at 7. Now the exchange ratio swung to 2.7 to 1, favoring America. In the mature radar era spanning July 1943 through August 1945, Japan lost 47 destroyers in night combat, while Americans lost only 4. The ratio had become staggering, 11.8 to 1 in America's favor. The technical specifications revealed the vast chasm between the systems. The American SG radar operated at 3 GHz frequency with a 10 cm wavelength. It generated 50 kilowatts of power. Against a destroyer target, it achieved ranges exceeding 15 nautical miles. Range accuracy measured plus or minus 40 yards. Bearing accuracy was plus or minus 0.5 degrees. The display showed all contacts on a revolutionary plan position indicator, a map-like view. Approximately 1,000 SG units were produced. The Japanese Type 22 radar operated at 150 MHz with a 2-meter wavelength. Power output was just 2 kilowatts. Range against a destroyer target reached approximately 10 nautical miles under optimal conditions. Range accuracy was plus or minus 300 yards. Bearing accuracy measured plus or minus 5 degrees. The display showed only an A-scope presentation. Production totaled approximately 300 units. The specifications told a story of technological generations separating the systems. American radar operated at frequencies providing superior resolution. It relied on magnetron tubes that Japan could not manufacture reliably. American systems integrated with fire control mechanisms Japan had never developed. Captured Japanese equipment and post-war interrogations exposed the full depth of the technological gap. Japanese forces had actually obtained examples of British cavity magnetrons early in the war, but couldn't reproduce them. When they captured radar sets featuring Yagi antennas, they didn't comprehend these were named after Hideo Sugu Yagi, a Japanese inventor whom their own military had disregarded. United States Strategic Bombing Survey interviews conducted post-war with Japanese naval officers found universal acknowledgement that radar had transformed naval warfare beyond Japanese capability to adapt. Officers testified that by 1943 they recognized the radar gap clearly but suppressed this knowledge to preserve morale. The Battle of Capes George on November 25, 1943, served as the final statement on Japanese night fighting superiority. Captain Arleigh Burke's destroyer Squadron 23 demonstrated perfect radar victory, sinking 3 Japanese destroyers without suffering any loss. This battle persuaded Japanese naval leadership that night surface combat had become suicide. Orders from Combined Fleet essentially ended night destroyer operations, conceding that the advantage in darkness now belonged entirely to the American forces. The MIT Radiation Laboratory deserved recognition for fundamentally revolutionizing naval warfare. Established in November 1940, under Dr. Lee Dubridge's direction, the laboratory expanded to nearly 4,000 employees and designed half of all radar systems deployed by United States forces. The work extended far beyond the SG radar alone, producing designs for over 100 different microwave systems, representing $1.5 billion in production value. The foundation resting beneath everything was the British cavity magnetron delivered through the TIZAD mission in September 1940. This single device, producing 1 kilowatt at 10 centimeter wavelength, possessed 100 times more power than existing technology. Americans mass-produced what the British had invented and what the Japanese could not replicate. 9 staff members from the radiation laboratory would eventually win Nobel Prizes. Their wartime contribution proved equally significant, enabling the electronic revolution that transformed naval combat from visual engagement into radar-directed warfare conducted beyond the range of human sight. The radar revolution forced fundamental changes in naval doctrine that endure today. Every modern navy accepts that electronic detection has superseded visual observation as the primary method of naval combat. The 1947 United States Naval War College study concluded that future naval operations would be determined by electronic capability rather than seamanship alone. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, established in the 1950s, built its founding principles on hard lessons from the radar war. Electronic warfare capability became the foundation of naval power. All other considerations fell secondary to sensor superiority. Japanese technical officers who grasped radar's implications early found themselves ignored by operational commanders wedded to traditional doctrine. The few officers trained in electronics became voices crying in the wilderness, predicting defeat while leadership dismissed them because it refused to acknowledge technological reality. This disconnection between technical understanding and operational decisions proved catastrophic. While American forces integrated radar into every naval operation, Japanese commanders continued planning visual-range night attacks, even as their ships went down in waters they could not see. The final accounting came through comparative loss statistics. The reversal was complete. Radar transformed night combat from a Japanese advantage into American dominance. The weapon Japan had perfected across decades was turned against them with technology they could never match. By war's end, of the 70 modern destroyers Japan possessed at Pearl Harbor, only approximately a dozen remained operational. The Imperial Japanese Navy that had entered the conflict as masters of night combat ended the war unable to operate after dark. Commander Tamachi Hara was the only Japanese destroyer captain from Pearl Harbor to survive the entire war. In 1961, he published his memoir as Japanese Destroyer Captain. While containing some factual errors, his assessment of the radar war stands as the most comprehensive first-hand account from the Japanese perspective. Hara participated in 16 major naval battles and witnessed the complete transformation of naval warfare unfold before his eyes. His ship, Amatsukaze, endured the November 13, 1942 battle despite severe damage from Helena's radar-directed guns. Later, Hara commanded Yajagi before finally taking the helm of the destroyer Shigura. He survived engagements where most fellow captains perished. In his memoir, Hara criticized Japanese leadership for failing to recognize how rapidly the enemy developed new weapons, and for never comprehending the implications of technological change. He lived to witness the Imperial Navy's night-fighting supremacy completely reversed by American radar. Admiral Raizo Tanaka, who commanded the Tokyo Express runs, published his own assessment in 1956 in the United States Naval Institute Proceedings, entitled Japan's Losing Struggle for Guadalcanal. He acknowledged that American radar had fundamentally changed naval warfare, rendering traditional Japanese night-fighting tactics obsolete. The radar war forced a profound philosophical reckoning within Japanese military culture. The fundamental premise of Bushido, that spiritual superiority could overcome material disadvantage, shattered against oscilloscopes and magnetrons. Post-war Japanese military philosophy had to reconcile traditional warrior culture with the reality of technological warfare. The lesson proved absolute and unambiguous. In modern warfare, technology is not supplementary, but supreme. Those who see first win. Those who see farthest dominate. Japanese destroyer losses, primarily to surface combat, broke down this way. November through December 1942, 4 destroyers lost. In 1943, 31 destroyers. In 1944, 28 destroyers. From January through August 1945, 14 destroyers. American destroyer losses in night surface combat showed a starkly different story. November through December 1942, 3 destroyers. In 1943, 4 destroyers. In 1944, 1 destroyer. From January through August 1945, 0 destroyers. By 1944, the technology gap had become absolute. American destroyers with effective radar numbered 175. Japanese destroyers with effective radar numbered 0. American radar range advantage reached 200 to 300%. Japanese night vision advantage had been completely negated. These numbers chronicle a revolution that transformed naval warfare in less than 2 years. The Imperial Japanese Navy, which had devoted decades to perfecting night combat, fell to technology that didn't exist when their training began. Fletcher-class destroyers, equipped with SG radar sets, accomplished something unprecedented in military history: the complete negation of an enemy's primary tactical advantage through technological superiority. Japanese night fighting expertise, carefully developed since 1904, became worthless in the face of magnetrons and oscilloscopes mass-produced in American factories. Commander Tamachi Hara's survival through 16 major battles granted him unique perspective on this transformation. From commanding a Matsukaze at Guadalcanal, where he first encountered American radar, to commanding Shigura when it was the sole survivor at Vela Gulf, he witnessed the complete reversal of naval warfare. The Imperial Japanese Navy had entered the war convinced that superior night fighting skills would offset American material advantages. By war's end, radar had proven definitively that technological superiority could completely negate human skill, training, and tradition. Fletcher-class destroyers carrying SG radar sets had not simply won a destroyer campaign. They had fundamentally transformed naval warfare from art to science, from human skill to electronic detection, from warrior tradition to technological dominance. Japanese officers who survived understood a fundamental truth that would define naval warfare for generations to come. The age of visual naval combat ended in the waters around Guadalcanal. In those dark waters, it was replaced forever by electronic warfare that showed no regard for courage, tradition, or the warrior spirit. They had mastered night combat, refining their skills across decades of training and experience. Yet in just 18 months, American radar turned that mastery into irrelevance, that expertise into worthlessness, and that night-fighting advantage into a fatal liability. The darkness that had been their greatest ally became their tomb. The Americans wielding radar became the undisputed masters of the night. The revolution was complete, irreversible, and devastating. In the end, those who could see in the darkness won. Those who remained blind to technological change were condemned to defeat in the very darkness they once ruled supreme.